You mentioned very briefly that this was primarily neck pain. Is that true?
No, it was actually it started out neck pain, but then it was mostly and most painfully shoulder pain, and then
Okay.
shooting pains down my arms.
Okay.
And I would try to explain to people, I try to explain to my husband, it was the layers of pain. I mean, had it not been me, I would have found it interesting, but because it was me, I found it just painful. But it
Yeah.
was, a deep muscle pain. It was in one particular place on this shoulder, like I was being constantly stabbed with an ice pick. It was the feeling that both shoulders had undergone a big sunburn. And then occasionally when I would turn my head a certain way, it would be shooting pains every which way. So it was quite a symphony of pain, I must say.
Yeah. And can you describe some of the ways that those pains were limiting you and disrupting your ability to function normally? You mentioned that reading was distracted and just talk about that.
Oh my goodness. I could barely sleep. I mean, eventually I would fall asleep out of exhaustion, I guess, but I would really toss and turn all night. I couldn't sit and be comfortable. I couldn't lie down and be comfortable. I could stand and still I would have the pain, but it would not be the shooting pain. So that was much more tolerable. Um, Even though I didn't feel like it, I disciplined myself to keep up my habit. I've long had a habit of walking 3 to 5 miles every day. So I kept that up, even though um, that often didn't feel so good either, but I felt it was important to continue that. It had an impact on me, obviously, emotionally and socially, and just in every way. I mean,
Hmm.
it was really a profound amount of pain.
Hmm. You also mentioned, Dulcie, those images that you had access to, at least the report through your portal. And you mentioned that you saw that there were several things that were mentioned as severe. Can you talk
Mhm.
about what maybe either you read, what was severe, or maybe that you didn't really read anything that time, but maybe a provider, a doctor explained what
Mhm.
they saw from that?
Yeah. So funny thing is, so I saw severe degenerative disc disorder, I believe, on that X-ray. That was prior to the MRI. And I think that each of the doctors I went to perhaps thought that the other doctor had shared with me the details, and nobody really had. And so um, at one point when I went, I had just maybe my second appointment with the neurosurgeon, and as he got up, it was just a very brief appointment. How are you doing? Testing my strength, testing my balance. Oh, that's another thing I meant to mention, the strength and balance and dizziness. But he, as he was walking out the door, he sort of turned around in a somewhat chastising voice, like even shaking his finger at me, said, "You can't afford to take another fall." Like falling was a habit I'd adopted or something. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he, you know, fortunately, he came back into the room and said, "Have you not seen your MRI?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And so he sat back down and pulled it up for me and said, uh, you have a very unusual case. And if this does progress to surgery, I'm going to have to refer you to a specialist." And I
Hmm.
said, "But you are the specialist. He's head of neurosurgery for a big hospital system here." And he said that unlike most neck issues that people see, mine is primarily at the C3, C4 level, and then C4, C5, C5, C6. And so I said to him, not at that appointment, but a subsequent one, I said, "Well, what would my life be like with surgery? Just for instance." And I mean, I will certainly never forget his quote, which, was not well put, but I mean, it certainly was striking. And this was the quote: "This would be morbidly difficult surgery for anyone, but especially for someone at your age." And
How did you feel, Dulcie,
oh
when
my
you heard those
God.
words? Yeah.
Well, let me just say, I was already really serious about my physical therapy, but that made me even more serious.
Yeah.
To the point that and Christina may remember this, there was one period between visits where I was so serious about it that I think I overdid it and kind of maybe troubled the nerves or something a little bit. So I had to get back and just be a reasonable person. But that was a shocking thing to hear, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. You briefly mentioned the dizziness and the strength or weakness that you had dealt with. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So, I tried to hide it at first because I didn't want to upset the people around me, but I could barely walk a straight line. It was like I was drunk or something.
Mm.
And so I had that going on, and not all the time, but with some frequency and with some potential of it leading to another fall. I remember a couple of times getting out of bed and I'd crash into the wall on one side and a table on the other, and I'd like have 3 close calls before I even got downstairs for breakfast.
Mm.
And so I had to be very aware of that. Dizziness, when I would close my eyes, I would lose my balance, and I had like no strength in my right arm and right hand. I couldn't pick up a cup of coffee, and I didn't have enough coordination or feeling in my fingers to turn the pages of a book.
Mm-hmm.
So that was all going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Hear the entire episode for free on iTunes, Spotify, other favorite podcast players, or go to mechanicalcareforum.com.